Hi there, I'm Dr. Myrdalis Diaz, and this is the Design Your Physician Life podcast. We have a great episode today brought to you by our Maxillary Mastermind, a personal and professional development program for physicians where you can learn entrepreneurship and earn CMEs. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Nerissa Kreher from the Pharma Industry MD Coach. We have a great conversation with Dr. Kreher about designing a fulfilling career in pharma. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Design Your Physician Life podcast, where you will get excited about being a physician, learn the tools that can help boost your success, and great tips from successful doctors. Join us to unlock the keys to an amazing physician life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Myrdalis Diaz Ramirez.
Hey guys, welcome to this episode of Design Your Physician podcast. We're very excited to have Dr. Nerissa Kreher here today with us. She's a pediatric endocrinologist. She's working on the biopharma industry now for over 15 years. She's a chief medical officer of a biotech company. She has experience in private and public companies. She's the CEO and founder of the Pharma Industry MD Coach, which is a business that was born out of the desire to help physicians during the pandemic. So welcome, Dr. Kreher. Thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we normally start, I like to go back, when little Nerissa was thinking about what to become when she was older. Was it like a little girl or a teenager, maybe in college when you decided to be a pediatric, and much less going back, like pediatrics and then endocrinology, which is a little bit of, in-depth work. So who was there? Little Nerissa, was she raised, and was she thinking about becoming a physician someday?
Yes. So my father had a lot to do with that. My dad wanted all of his children, but especially his daughters, I have a sister as well, to be able to take care of ourselves and be independent. So I grew up in a rather rural part of North Carolina, and my father had some college education, but he did not graduate from college. And in his mind, there were several ways to be able to be independent. You could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer, or a veterinarian. And he really pushed academics, which I'm incredibly grateful for, and really wanted us to have professional degrees. College was important. So my dad...
He didn't have college, right? He didn't have college preparation, or did
he? Had some college education, but he never graduated. So I think he did maybe a couple of years of business in college, but then dropped out and took a different path. So, and he was sort of a small entrepreneur. He owned multiple businesses. He did some land development, real estate. So looking back, he really maybe infused some of that entrepreneurial spirit into me that drove me to the Pharma Industry MD Coach. But at the time, he really wanted me to go into something more in the sciences than in the business side of the world. So medical school, I was very interested in science, so that wasn't an issue for me. It wasn't hard for him to push me towards medicine because I loved science, I loved math. So I went to medical school. Your question about pediatric endocrinology is interesting. I actually knew that I wanted to do endocrinology before I knew I wanted to be a pediatrician.
That's strange.
Yes.
That goes like the other way usually.
Exactly. So somewhat of the opposite approach. The endocrinology came from a physiology course in college, actually. The pathways just clicked with me. And some of my fellow students, I can remember people saying, this makes no sense. And to me, endocrinology it completely made sense. Upregulation, downregulation. So I really thought I would probably end up doing internal medicine and then endocrinology. But in medical school, in my third year, during my pediatric rotation, I sort of fell in love with pediatrics, and that put me on the path to pediatric endocrinology.
That's amazing. Well, congratulations. There's not many pediatric endocrinologists available, and you're one of them. And your father, you say, besides being somebody who was telling you guys, hey, you guys have to study, be independent. These professions will always have clients and patients. You will always find people who will need either lawyers or doctors or veterinarians. But he also told you about entrepreneurship. And not only that, he taught you about academics. And that's where you went to. So when you graduated medical school and your residency and fellowship, you went into academics, correct?
That's correct. So I did my training at Riley Hospital in Indianapolis. So I did my pediatric residency. I was a chief resident, and then my endocrine fellowship there. And I stayed on as junior faculty for a year after my fellowship training. I should also mention that during my fellowship training, I had a great opportunity to participate in an NIH grant that allowed me to get my clinical research master's degree during my fellowship training. So the academic piece was really something that I enjoyed. I was doing clinical research. I also worked in a bench research lab during part of my fellowship. I very quickly realized that piece was not for me. But the overarching research academics piece, I really enjoyed being a part of. So again, I did stay for a year as an academic appointment in the pediatric endocrine division at Riley Hospital.
I mean, after that, you went to Boston.
Yes.
Tell us about your Boston years.
Yes. So Boston was driven. My husband was a year behind me, med peds, and wanted to do a sports medicine fellowship. And the sports medicine fellowship is via a match. So you're not just applying and getting a fellowship position, you have to go through the match. So it was a bit stressful, frankly, that we were trying to find the match for him, but I was interviewing for faculty roles, not knowing where he would ultimately match. So we were looking in Boston, in Wisconsin, and in California. He matched in Boston. I was pretty sure I had an academic appointment role in clinical research in a pediatric endocrine division. And unfortunately, that job fell through due to budget cuts. I was offered a job at that institution doing clinical time, so an 80% clinical role. And I'm actually very happy that I was able to, at that sort of young part of my profession, say, this is really not what I want. I don't enjoy practice day to day. I enjoy the clinical research. And so I'm grateful that I was, I guess, strong enough to not just take the job, but to go and look for other opportunities that would really fulfill what I was looking to do in my career. And ultimately, that ended up being a role in a biopharma company as a medical affairs medical director, where I was running a phase 4 clinical registry. So I was involved in research. It was supporting a recombinant human growth hormone. So it was, in an area that I knew well and I understood. I knew a lot of people working in that space. So it was a really nice entry into industry that I had no idea was going to happen as we were moving our young family to the Boston area.
So then basically kind of the lack of a job took you to this other job, and you've been an employee there in different companies, right? Now for over 16 years. Tell us a little bit about the culture of communication, because in medicine, when we're in clinical positions, we communicate differently within our teams than we do in industry, right? And I think that's a big challenge that we face when we're trying to look for these different ways of exerting our profession. What would you say are challenges that you see now that you're coaching other physicians into transitioning into these type of jobs that you see specifically for communication with the teams?
Yeah. The communication piece, I think it's exposing yourself to people who speak a different professional language than we do in medicine. So you might be exposed to someone who is a marketing major and they're speaking marketing language, or you might be exposed to someone who's speaking regulatory language. So in in my experience, it was incredibly intellectually stimulating because I got to learn all of these new languages. Whereas in medicine, obviously intellectually stimulating, but we're all speaking that same medical language typically. And so this just broadened my horizons to a different part of the world of people in marketing, commercial, et cetera.
How do you see the physicians transitioning when they're coming to you for coaching? How do you see them transitioning from a position where they are, considered to be the captain of the ship? We're told that you're the leader of this, you know, ship that is your patient care. We're in the hospital, and then now you're going to a position where you're not necessarily the captain of the ship, right? Um, you're a part of a team. You're going to have peers who didn't go to medical school, and then you guys have to report to this hierarchy, right? How do you see that difference and that transition?
Yeah. So that's something I actually talk to clients about when we're doing initial consultations. I talk to them about this piece because I think it's really important. So you have to recognize that there are other pressures and decisions that have to be made that are very cross-functional in nature. And so things like timelines, like budgets, like what is the impact of a clinical trial design on the actual patients that might be enrolling in the trial. So you have to think about all of these other factors that might drive your decision making. So even though I might design a Cadillac of a clinical trial, if it blows the budget, if it blows the timeline, if patients aren't going to enroll because there are too many assessments or it requires them to be away from home for too long, that's not going to be a successful trial. So even though my Cadillac trial might be the best way to get the information, it might not be the most reasonable way to get the information. And maybe I need to have a Toyota of a clinical trial that's still going to get us where we need to be. So those kinds of cross-functional decision making, that happens all the time in the pharma industry. And people have to really recognize that the physician's view is really important, but it's only one of multiple views that have to be considered in that decision making.
So you teach people to work there. Imagine that, or have you ever considered on your own, like opening your research company or having a product or a service or something as an entrepreneur starting from scratch besides your coaching business?
That is an interesting question. So I have occasionally considered, did I want to be the chief executive officer of a biotech company? I actually really, really enjoy my role as the chief medical officer. I think that I'm able to utilize my medical skills and the business skills that I've acquired throughout my career in a way that furthers drug development to help people and patients. So although I have occasionally considered, would I really want to full on go that entrepreneurial route, I think where I am is where I'm able to provide the most contribution to our society And so I'm quite content in this role and happy doing it.
So let's talk about your role, your daily living. When you wake up, you decided to be a CMO. So tell us what a CMO day is like in biotech.
Yeah, sure. So I should start by explaining that I've also worked my way up to chief medical officer. So I didn't sort of just land here, right? So the chief medical officer role is typically the highest medical role in the company. So I'm a part of the executive team, and I oversee clinical development, medical affairs, drug safety or pharmacovigilance, and a couple of other areas like patient advocacy. So my path to CMO started as medical director in medical affairs. I then transitioned to a clinical development role, and throughout my career have made those stair steps through medical director, senior medical director, executive medical director, vice president, and ultimately chief medical officer. So my day-to-day role as a chief medical officer, it's incredibly varied. Some days I'm really in the weeds working with my team on designing a clinical trial to the nitty-gritty of what exactly are the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Other days or hours in the day, I may be talking to investors to tell them about our company. Other days, I might be at a medical conference where we're presenting some of our non-clinical or clinical data. And that might be supporting my team who's actually presenting the poster or on the stage presenting. And sometimes it's actually me doing the presentation, depending on the audience, depending on the medical conference. So there is some travel involved. The other thing that I get to do a lot, which is one of a very rewarding part of the role, is I do get to interact with patient organizations. And so talking to patients and families about the diseases that we're trying to help develop cures for, getting their input, understanding what's important to them, to really bring that back to the company and try to incorporate it into the day-to-day culture of the company. So in summary, it's incredibly varied. The hours are more consistent, I think, than clinical medicine. So, is it an 8 to 6 job, a 9 to 5 job? Very much Monday through Friday. I do work on the weekends because there's always something that I can be catching up on. Maybe it's some literature reading. I'm typically not on call for anything unless there was a specific major issue happening that I needed to be aware of after hours.
As a CMO, because like you're saying that the hours are different. However, you're still working on the weekends and you have to travel, and there's other challenges with this position versus being a clinical physician. Do you find many of your colleagues in similar situations, CMOs, do you see them being burnout in some way compared to the clinical physicians?
Yeah. I think it's a very different type of, I don't think burnout. I would never describe myself, and I think most of the CMO colleagues that I know, as being burnt out. I think the stress is different. We are driven on different cycles and timelines. So I can often look out 3, 6, 9 months and predict, April is going to be a very busy month. We have 3 medical conferences. Maybe we're presenting data. Maybe there's a clinical trial that might be starting. There are all these things that you can look at what's happening and really make predictions about when are the busy months going to be happening and when are the less busy months going to be happening. So there's much more predictability around it as compared to, I think, most of my clinical colleagues. The stress level is almost always there. You're on call, you've got nights, you've got weekends, you're working holidays. And so I just think it's a different cadence to the amount of stress that potentially contributes more to burnout for clinical physicians.
And do you see some of your colleagues, CMOs, like transitioning to other positions or just remaining like as CMOs, for the length of time? Do you see them like moving, transitioning to CEOs of companies, or do you see them, this stress is predictable, I know the cycles and everything, but I really want to do maybe going back to clinical or even going out of medicine into investments and doing some other things?
Yes. So I can, right off the top of my head, think of several physicians who have worked their way up through chief medical officer and then taken on chief executive officer roles. There are a few physicians that, I can easily think of who have done that. Also, physicians who have transitioned more to the business side, where they lead the business development function. So they're looking more at acquisitions of other companies or of other products, and really using that medical knowledge to think about what is the unmet need, how does this fit into a company portfolio. And again, it's still lots of medical input and knowledge that's contributing to that, but it's more of that business function. There are certainly physicians who have worked in the pharmaceutical industry and then gone to government agencies like NIH or FDA, for example. That actually happens both ways, right? People who have been at FDA coming into the biopharma industry as well. Certainly other physicians who have gone and worked in venture capital organizations. So they're starting to, from really kind of ground up, evaluate potential opportunities, contribute to building businesses from the ground up as part of a venture capital organization. So there really are lots and lots of opportunities for physicians out there. I think we're just not exposed to them in our typical training. And you really have to look for those opportunities, network, and understand what some of these opportunities are. But I guess I'm an example of being able to tell our physician colleagues that there are opportunities out there.
So if I'm a physician and I'm like, I really don't want to do the clinical medicine right now, or I'm just inspired by what you're doing, which is what we're trying to do here. Where do you think people should look? Like, is it like you look on LinkedIn, you look on just particular website? I know that there's a website called docjobs.com, for example, and then they have that, and then there's LinkedIn, and then there's meetings, and you can go to. Which places do you recommend people go to for this type of job? Or who do you recommend they ask specifically?
Yeah. So the places I typically point people to, and I would divide it in sort of broader opportunities and then the pharmaceutical opportunity. So the broader opportunities, there are a couple of people, there's a group called Look for Zebras, and that physician does an email and has information on different jobs, so not just pharma. There's also, you mentioned a conference, and I can't give your audience a whole lot of information. I haven't participated in this, but there's a group called SEAK, SEAK. I know they hold a conference and talk about alternative career paths for physicians. There's a non-clinical physician Facebook group that I think is a really, really nice resource for people. My experience there is a lot of talk about utilization management, and the insurance industry, as well as the pharmaceutical industry. Laura McCain runs that group, and I think it's a great resource for people. So those are ones that immediately come to mind. On the pharmaceutical side, of course, my coaching, I have a website. I publish a weekly blog, a couple of free pieces of information on my website as well for people about the roles. So that's industrymdcoach.com. There's also another physician who works in pharma named Marjorie Stiegler, and Marjorie has some courses online. So there really is a lot out there, but you have to look for it and gain awareness through podcasts like yours. So thank you for helping physicians become aware. Finally, I would say LinkedIn is really the place where I do have my clients spend their time doing job searching, doing their networking. In the pharmaceutical industry, the recruiters, the companies really spend their time on LinkedIn. So I think that's where physicians should be if they're interested in the biopharmaceutical industry.
So tell us about your typical client. Now you actually, you know what? Before we go to your client, I want to learn about your entrepreneurship. Let's talk about how your coaching business was born, because there's passion behind your business. I really want to our listeners to listen to that story. What inspired you to create your business? How you found your name, and why are you now an entrepreneur besides being this CMO?
Sure. So my coaching business, which is now the Pharma Industry MD Coach. Initially, I named it Industry MD Coach. And to me, it made all the sense in the world because the industry, quote unquote, for most physicians means the pharmaceutical industry. But as I started doing some market research, I learned that people actually didn't know what industry I was talking about. So I added the Pharma Industry MD Coach. So that's a little bit of insight into, you don't always get it right the first time. Entrepreneurship is iterative, and you just have to keep learning and incorporating those learnings as you go. So that's sort of a practical piece. But where did the company start? It started during COVID. I became aware of life coaching during COVID. And as many of us, not just physicians, but I think the entire world, we were isolated. I think a lot of people were going through mental distress. And I came across a group of women physicians that were doing life coaching. And it really changed things for me. It was incredibly eye-opening. The point about life coaching is that we're often driven by believing that our thoughts are actually true. And so it's this work to consider that our thoughts drive our results. And so really changing your thoughts to make them help you accomplish and become successful. So as I'm in this women physician coaching group, I'm listening to my physician colleagues, and there's lots of distress, there's lots of unhappiness. They don't have PPE. They're scared for their lives. They're scared to bring COVID home to their families. I mean, remember, this was before we had vaccines, before we even understood how COVID was spread. So a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. And I no longer hold an active license. So it's not as if I could go help see patients in an emergency department. I don't own a manufacturing center, so I couldn't make more PPE for my colleagues. And I really felt this need to try to help them. And as I was learning, people were looking for alternative ways to use their medical degrees. And I realized that I could help them use their medical degrees in the pharmaceutical industry. And on the flip side, we need more physicians in the pharmaceutical industry. I think people don't understand this, but when I'm looking for physicians, the supply is much lower than the demand. And so I had this sort of light bulb that I'm sitting in the middle of this group of physicians who want and need something different, and the pharmaceutical industry that I enjoy working in that needs more physicians, and I can help bring them together. I can help educate. And that's really how the pharma industry MD coach started, was unfortunately COVID, but also just trying to look for a way that I could help my physician colleagues.
That's great. Thank you for all that work. And then when the physicians come to you, what type of physician is looking for this type of help, of coaching? In which situation are they that they say, hey, Nerissa, I really need help with this?
Yeah. So most of the time, people find me after doing some soul searching and deciding that they don't want to practice medicine in the traditional way anymore. And maybe they have looked at alternative careers like insurance utilization management, the biopharmaceutical industry has come up, maybe consulting, and they come to me typically ready and knowing that they want to go into the pharmaceutical industry. So all of my coaching is just focused on pharma. I don't coach on utilization management, for example. So they typically come to me knowing that they want to make that transition. But they also come usually not knowing what are the potential roles. So it's not just one role, there are multiple roles. And we do a lot of work thinking about what is their personality, what do they enjoy most about medicine, and trying to match that to one of 3 or 4 typical roles for physicians in pharma.
So how does the sessions with you look like? How would they look like? Like, I'm coming, hey, you know what? I really want to go to pharma. I want to learn this. I want to get ready for a job there. What sort of things am I going to learn with you?
Yeah. So I work with clients on a one-on-one basis. So it's incredibly tailored to the individual physician. So we're going to work on understanding their personality. I do some personality testing and really hone in on what is the kind of role they want. So we do a lot of education around that and get them to focus on, is it medical affairs? Is it clinical development? Is it drug safety? And then we start the process of getting their resume in place. Some physicians only have an academic CV and no resume, so we work on their resume together. We get their elevator pitch or professional summary in place. That is a 5 to 6 sentence, really advertisement for the physician. What do they bring to the table? Then they're able to use that in their LinkedIn profile. So we build their LinkedIn profile together and we start the job searching. We build a company target list, which helps them really focus on what companies they should be looking at. We do job searching together so that I can teach them how to decipher these job descriptions. It's one of the things that I typically hear. People are completely overwhelmed by having no idea what the language in the job description means. And so I decipher it for them and I teach them how to decipher it as they move through the process. We then do interviewing preparation. And ultimately, when they've got that job offer in hand, we work on negotiating of salary, of bonus, et cetera. So I'm really holding the physician's hand through the process of discovery and understanding what they want to look for through that final job offer and taking the actual offer.
Well, that's tons and tons of steps that you've mentioned, but my goodness, we could ask about any of them and have a whole lecture series on each of them. But I want to talk about one of them. Let's talk about the CV, because as you said, the physicians, we just say, you know what, I went to medical school here, I did my internship, did my residency, and that's it, boom. But there's a lot more. Like you say, you have to sell yourself, not only through the CV, also through the pitch. Which elements are great elements to have on a good CV that are going to be taken care of? Because there's some companies, as I understand, that you go through your CV and there's a lot of electronic, artificial intelligence now searching rather than just going directly to a person. So tell us which elements are really important on a CV.
Sure. So a statistic that points to exactly what you were saying is that a person spends about 7 seconds looking at a resume before they decide to put it in the yes or the no pile. So you've got 7 seconds to catch someone's attention. And that comes back to that professional summary or elevator pitch. So in a resume, you want to use active verbs. So it's not just a list of what you've done. It's really telling the story with an active verb of what you've accomplished. And so things like, I guess an example would be developed a peer-reviewed protocol to reduce nosocomial infections. So that's really showing that you were in charge, you were developing. So it's giving that story versus just a list, right? I mean, otherwise on a CV, the alternative to that language might be responsible for reduction of nosocomial infection. I mean, that doesn't really tell the story that you were the leader, you were developing it. So that's a critical point. The other piece is really making it chronologically focused. So you want to list your current role first. You want to explain what your responsibilities in that role have been. Publications, if you've had publications, are an important piece, especially for roles in clinical development, plus minus medical affairs. And I'm not suggesting that every physician is going to even have publications on their resume. It's not absolutely necessary to get a role in pharma, but if you have it, that is an important piece. And then really, it's honing in on telling the reader, what are your transferable skills? How do you take what you've done in medicine and transfer those skills to the pharmaceutical industry? So there's a lot of storytelling involved, and I'm often pulling it out of the physician to really get it on paper so that it makes their story come alive.
That's incredible. Just that word transferable and then transferable skills. We don't think about that. Like, how can you really, why are people interested in physicians? Not only because of the knowledge that you have acquired through medical school, but also other skills that you bring in terms of being capable of doing analysis and putting, all this information together, getting a lot of resources, being resourceful, and all these skills that you probably need to be working these positions. And then, we get into communication like we were talking before, and it's a whole different language. If you were going to build a pitch for a doctor, let's talk about what's the median age. We haven't talked about the median age of people who come to see you. Like, do you see people who are like, we graduate usually with early 30s from our medicine. And then do you see people like in their 40s or 50s, like transitioning out, or like mid-career in medicine coming to see you? So how would you build, well, first, what ages are you getting, in that stage? And then how would you build like somebody who's like really in the middle, in the midst of their careers, their elevator pitch?
Yeah. So most of my clients are mid-career. I would say more early and or mid-career. Fewer people towards the end. So hearing them tell their story helps me pull those pieces out. But then we're thinking about things like, can they talk about clinical research experience? So can we build a sentence about transferable skills with research? Have they written protocols? Have they done data analysis? Have they done informed consent? Are they familiar with good clinical practices? And again, not all clients are, and that's totally okay. But if you have clinical research experience, I'm really playing that up because those are truly transferable skills. Another piece we haven't talked about and maybe falls into the communication piece is education. So a lot of the role of the physician in pharma is educating. And people forget this, but as physicians, we're always educating, right? We're educating our patients, their families. We're educating perhaps residents, fellows, other physicians. And so if they have education experience, we're also building a sentence in their pitch about their education experience. Maybe they've done presentations and we want to make sure that we're incorporating that. Maybe they've built education programs or they're in charge of grand rounds at their hospital. So we're incorporating the education piece as well. Can they work well in a cross-functional team? This ties back to something we were talking about earlier, but they need to be a cross-functional player. And so if we've got people who have skills in leading, in developing, in managing other team members, I'm making sure that we're incorporating that because it ties to being able to work cross-functionally. So those are some of the components I'm looking for. And it's also something that physicians often downplay. We don't think about all of these incredible skills we bring. So I will say I'm often really dragging these things out of physicians because they're not great at acknowledging their skills or selling their skills. And I have to help them put that out there and really help them have that confidence and pride in all that they've accomplished.
Wow, that's great. It's, different topics, different themes, and there's way more for you guys if you want to work with Dr. Nerissa Kreher. You told us earlier, it's the Pharma Industry MD Coach. Tell us where to find you on social media, on LinkedIn, on your website and everything if people want to work with you.
Sure. So the best place for lots of resources is my website. And again, that's industrymdcoach.com. There's a free download on all of the different roles for physicians. The weekly blog that I mentioned, I've interviewed many physicians that have made the transition. So you're hearing other stories, not just mine. And I think that can be really helpful. I have a Facebook page, Industry MD Coach on Facebook. And those are really the two main places I point people.
Any final comments for our listeners? Anything that you want to tell them about, like it's possible in the transition? Any important tips?
Yes. One of my important tips is physicians, we often undersell ourselves. There's a lot of imposter phenomenon or imposter syndrome for women and men physicians. We're perfectionists, and you don't have to be a Harvard-trained, principal investigator of a randomized clinical trial to land a role in pharma. What we need in pharma is your medical training, your clinical knowledge. So be confident in yourself, be confident in what you've accomplished. And this transition is really available to physicians of all different backgrounds and training. So I really encourage you to be proud of what you've accomplished and bring that confidence to the table if you're thinking about making this transition.
Thank you very much for being here. You guys heard it. You can find the career online, Pharma Industry MD Coach. And thanks for being here. We'll see you then.
Thank you so much.
Well, guys, that's it for today. Stay tuned for more of our Design Your Physician Live podcast, which was brought to you today by our Maxillary Mastermind, an exclusive personal and professional development program for physicians who want to learn entrepreneurship to overcome being overwhelmed, lost in medicine, being maybe burnt out. That's a tool I use, and that's a tool I recommend for you guys. We will continue to bring you useful resources to help develop your physician entrepreneur life like we did today with Dr. Nerissa Kreher. Actually, you can find more of her at industrymdcoach.com. Stay in touch with us. Visit our website, maxallure.com. That is MAXALLURE, Please don't forget to subscribe, like us, give us 5 stars, and share the love. Share with your friends and family. See you later. Thanks. Bye.
Please remember that Design is not providing specific financial, medical, or career advice. Our only intent is to stimulate your appetite for growth by sharing our experience and those of our speakers, coaches, and guests. Your personal growth and success will be unique to your circumstances and your hard work. We sincerely hope you enjoyed the show and look forward to seeing you next week.